Welcome back to Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast. I'm Russ Joy at Joy on Broad, joined as always by Joe Giglio Fan Club's president, Anthony SanFilippo, who you can find on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. Anthony, we've had an interesting week. Not a whole lot of Flyers news is broken. We're going to kind of look at the way that this roster, if no other big moves are made, could be filled out. We'll be talking about a couple other somewhat Flyers-related topics, especially, and this is kind of our interesting off-season episode where we're going to talk a little bit about the media in Philadelphia and how it pertains to the Philadelphia Flyers and the media who follows them. So it's good to be back again with you, and this will, I guess, be an abbreviated episode. We were working on getting a guest. I believe that should probably work out for the next episode, and we'll see where we go from here. But Anthony, any hot takes you want to pass off there before we get into things?
Yeah, well, why are we recording at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday, Russ? I think it's your fault. I think it's your fault. Again.
This one's my fault. So
I got to wake up. So just to let everybody know. So we're recording 6:30 in the morning, okay? So Saturday night, okay, and it poured, just in case anybody doesn't remember. The Saturday night was the night that it rained really, really hard. I'm down in the city. I went to go it's funny, I do some reviews. People don't, because I got my fingers in so many different pies. So I do some reviews for a website called Philly Life and Culture. And I was at Jeremy Piven stand-up comedy Saturday night. And so, yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thing to see, Artie Gold, doing stand-up. And that's what everybody in the crowd wanted to see. They all wanted Ari Gold lines from the show and stuff like that. And it was huge Entourage fans. And he was just kind of blah. But nevertheless, it was a night. By the time the night ends for me and I get home and, everything's wrapped up and I get back to my house, I get maybe 3 hours sleep, 3.5 hours sleep. Mm-hmm. I have an incredibly long Sunday ahead of me. But because of your travel schedule, Russ Joy, I am awake at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday with the rest of the house sound asleep. No one else is awake but me. And I've had no sleep, and I'm cranky, and I'm miserable. And so, of course, you decide this is the day that we're going to pick to have Anthony have a hot take about the Philadelphia media scene. And
it's perfect, right?
Oh, yeah,
this is perfect. This is setting up Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
I'm standing out on your lawn right now.
That's right, you are. And you're going to have me yell to get off of it, even though it's soaking wet and still probably raining a little bit. I mean, I don't know if it was so miserable. It's
been a long while since one of the Anthony SanFilippo Get Off My Lawn columns for Crossing Broad, so I figured an oral part 3 would kind of make sense.
There's a reason it's been a while, but we'll get into. I'll give you an oral version of one. So yes, it's really kind of interesting. So on Saturday, I'm listening to the radio as I'm driving around. I have running some errands early in the day, and I got WIP tuned on, and so first off, you got Glenn Macnow and Ray Didinger on, and of course they're two of the best, right? They're everybody loves that show when they're on. So much so, Bob Wankel, who does our Phillies coverage on Crossing Broad, also I do the Crossed Up podcast with, starts texting me. He says, "Are you listening to these guys?" He says, "They're doing this is awesome. This is like a great," and they're doing a thing about the state of media just in general. But I mean, and they're relating it to Philadelphia as far as it pertains to covering sports teams and how it's kind of died off and it's not. You don't have any like real hard scrabble, journalists anymore who are going to ask hard and tough questions and, et cetera, et cetera. It's all become a real love fest. And so this leads into the next show on WIP, which is Bleeding Green Nation, which is James Seltzer and John Borchard. And they do a nice job. I mean, in all honesty, if you really want to, talk good Eagles talk, I think that they do a nice job. But they both admit to, and fair enough, they both admit to being fans. And so they're fans who have a radio show, which in a lot of ways, I could be real old school, Russ, and sit here and say, well, that's terrible because, you're supposed to be objective and da-da-da-da-da. But John Borchard says something that's really, really true, and that is that, we all got into this business in some capacity not because we wanted to be objective journalists, but because we were fans at one point and said this is something we would love to do. And so it's fair to say that, yes, you could be a fan in a sense and still do this job. It's certainly a thing, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to take that fandom and let it cloud everything that you do. I mean, if you're going to be a reporter, if you're going to be any kind of journalist, broadcast journalist, print journalist, online blogger, whatever the case might be, if you're going to be a journalist talking about the local sports teams, or any sports team for that matter, you really can't let a bias show through. You're allowed to have one, for sure. You're allowed to sit there and be a fan, for sure. But if you're going to talk about it or report about it, you can't have a bias break through. And so the big story this past week in Philadelphia was the whole Phillies' inability to make a trade for Manny Machado. And the problem is that at the beginning of last week, I think it was on Monday, as a matter of fact, last Monday.
It's July 16th that this went down.
Yeah, okay. So Joe Giglio on WIP comes on with a report that the Phillies are, going
Machado to the Phils Wednesday morning. Andy
Right.
McPhail is a magician, source says.
Yes. So that's what he said. So that's what he tweeted out, right? That was what his Twitter thing was. But he goes on the air on Monday. He was actually filling in. He was on during the day. So this goes to show you, okay, here's a guy who's usually on at night, doesn't usually have the audience that he has doing drive time, filling in for Ike Reese. And so now he's going to be on when a lot of people are listening, and this is his report. And he says, listen, it's from a source, and then he's on a radio saying this. It's from a source. It's an industry source. So that immediately tells me right away, when you're using that word industry, tells me right away you are not talking to someone who is involved with this trade in any capacity. You're not talking to anybody on the Baltimore side. You're not talking to anybody on the Philly side, okay? So he says it's a source in the industry, a guy he knows in Baltimore who doesn't, and he's saying this all on the air, who doesn't work for the Orioles, but knows a lot of people who do. Okay, so now basically he's Joe Giglio used to work in Baltimore, so he's talking to a former colleague of his, whether it was at the establishment that he worked at or at another media establishment, who does not cover the Orioles but is familiar with the Orioles or familiar with people who work for the Orioles. So therefore, he is now using basically a third party source, which is illegal. You can't do that. I almost said it was illegal. It's not illegal, but it's wrong. It's just not right.
It's so bad and so misinformed and so disingenuous. It should be illegal.
It should be illegal. No, so basically, what he's doing is he is now.
Oh my God, that was the perfect Richard Nixon moment.
That
would have been such a good setup.
I am not a crook, right?
I'm saying that if a sports radio host says it in Philadelphia, it's not illegal.
Okay, so this would be like, and I'm going to give you an example, and this is a very fair comparison. This would be like you reporting on Crossing Broad or on the Crossing broadcast. Okay, if we want to make a real comparison, okay. This would be like you texting me and saying, "Hey, have you heard? Since you're tied into the sports media, you heard anything about this trade?" And I tell you that here's what I'm hearing, and you go on Crossing Broadcast and say, I was talking to an industry source who told me that this is what's going to happen. Now, I am not plugged. I'm not tied in with the Phillies. I'm not talking to the Phillies. I'm not talking to the Orioles. I'm just giving you, hey, here, I know people who are down there. Here's what the scuttlebutt is. That's maybe not public, but I'll share it with you, and that's fine. And then you would go and turn around and put it out there on Crossing Broadcast. That's what Joe Giglio did. Okay, that's what he did, and it was wrong. You cannot make a source your friend. You cannot make a source another member of the media. A source, in and of itself, by its very nature, has to be someone associated with the subject that you are covering. Okay, or the subject you are discussing. All right. So if you're going to source something for a Phillies-Orioles potential trade, that source better damn well be either a member of the Orioles front office, a member of the Phillies front office, or if you're talking about specific players like Machado in this instance, his agent. an agent that's tied into the conversation and the negotiations. Okay, so that is a source. To quote a friend who's in the media who doesn't cover the team, that's not a source. And that's the problem that I had personally with Joe's report, whether it was accurate or not. And I said something to Bob right away. I'm like, listen, this guy could be spot on. He could be spot on with this report. It could be exactly correct. It doesn't matter. It's bogus. You can't do this. This is not what the media's job is. The media's job is not to source each other. That's not how it works. Lo and behold, I've already gone on too long about it, but lo and behold, what ends up happening is everything that he reported about the trade doesn't happen. Big surprise. And Machado ends up with the Dodgers. And so, of course, everybody on Twitter starts going after Giglio and attacking him and telling him that he's, they're now calling him Joey Sources, right? That's kind of his new nickname. And I think it's hysterical. Anyway, so Seltzer, towards the end of his show yesterday, Saturday, is talking to John Barchard and saying, I don't understand why everybody is so upset with Joe Giglio. I don't get it. Blah, 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 blah. He just got a source of his gave him a little bit of wrong information. And is that the end of the world? And it's like, Seltzer, you need to understand what the problem is here. It's not that the report was wrong. It's not that the report was one thing and the Dodgers came in over the top. That's it. The actual physical elements of this thing are the least important part of why people are upset. Why people are upset is because they were misled. They were misled by someone who made it sound like that he had a great connection with information and spent an entire day. I mean, Vince Quinn went on the next show and said, Giglio is so certain about this. Machado is going to be here. Let's talk about it. And spent his entire show talking about how Machado in the lineup. I mean, he did an entire show on WIP later that day following up on Giglio's report. I mean, that's how much that people were buying it over at WIP. So my argument is that you can't do. So I go on Twitter yesterday, or after as they're signing off or getting ready to sign off, basically just explaining to Seltzer why it was a mistake, and then every minion from WIP jumps on me and they start yelling, I can't believe you're still butthurt about this, blah blah blah. And it's like, guys, you don't understand what the problem is. You just don't understand what you cannot have this, because this is in essence what you hear about everybody talking about in politics. And we don't ever want to talk politics on our podcast, but this is everything that you hear when you hear people talk about fake news or misleading stories or clickbait headlines or whatever the case might be. These are the things that you hear and you cannot have happen. Okay, so that's the problem, and it's pervasive in all of media. It's really pervasive in sports media, and I tell you right now, it's something that has been going on in hockey for far longer than anyone is willing to admit. And so that's how I'm circling it back to get it here into why does this conversation fit Snow the Goalie? Because it's been pervasive in hockey for far too long. And what it leads to is a collection of reporters who, I just don't think that people like the reporters that are covering the Flyers these days. And in some instances, I can't blame them because reporters have now resorted to one tactic. This is what reporters have to do now. Because there are so many people who can put stories or put news reports out there, whether they're true or not. Anybody who's got a forum can now say, I got sources, or I've heard this, and blah blah blah, and the public's going to believe it because the public is just looking for information, right? Feed me information, and so that's what the public wants. So anybody who can give it, they're going to gravitate toward them. So what the traditional mainstream media people have done in all of sports, this isn't just hockey or just germane to the Flyers beat, is they've kind of resorted to pack journalism, in the sense that they feel like they're no longer competing with each other. Okay, back in the day, the Inquirer writer and the Daily News writer, they didn't share information, nor did they share it with the suburban guys, or the guy for for what it was, Comcast Sportsnet at the time. Nobody shared information. You all did your own job, and you all tried to beat each other. I mean, that was the concept of it, right? But now it's come to the point that where they have a bit of a bunker mentality. They say, in order for us to survive, we all got to just report the same thing. And so they all do. Everybody kind of does it. And it's worse in hockey than it is in every other sport. And so because of that, it allows the teams to kind of dictate availability, who's talking when you can get information, and there is less availability for the media for players now than there ever was. I'm telling you, walk over to
why is
go
that?
ahead. So again, because of this is what it's become, is because there are so many. So the Flyers and the NHL just in general, to their credit, have always been more welcoming to blogs or smaller media, newer media outlets. So you go up to that press box, there's 5-6 seats for your traditional media, and then there are 30 for people who you don't even like. There are people who are up in that press box who I swear to you, I've seen their face for 7 years, and I still don't know who the hell they write for. Like, I have no idea. I've never been on their site. I know nothing about them. It's such a small little rinky-dink operation, and yet they're there, and they're there every game, and they're in the locker room every game. They never ask questions. They're there though, right? So they make their presence known. Even Broad Street Hockey, who has undergone serious turnover and changes, not necessarily for the better, in the past few years. They used to have, so Travis Hughes, who used to be their guy, he actually started Broad Street Hockey back before it was even a Sports Blog Nation website. But Travis used to be at every game. And then Travis used to have one of his, once they became SB Nation, one of his writers, somebody from Broad Street Hockey was always at every game, and they were there. And they started to get a little bit more involved, and they would ask a question here and there kind of thing. But even now, when it's run by completely different people, Travis is now running NBC Sports Philadelphia, but it's run by a completely different group of people, and they send a reporter down there, and she's a nice girl, sweet girl, and she kind of hangs around and gets her. But she doesn't ask anybody any questions. She doesn't talk. She doesn't have any relationships with anybody. But anyway, so this is what the NHL had allowed, and that's okay. I mean, to me, it's okay. You want to expand that, right? You want to find avenues to reach different potential readers or different potential fans, and that's good, and I get it. But what's because of that, you now have this, this mentality that I'm going to make a name for myself, and I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to report something, and I'm going to say this is what it's going to be, and I'm going to cross my fingers that I'm right. And if I'm right, then people are going to look at me like, oh, okay, this guy's somebody I can trust, or this girl's somebody I can trust. And if I'm wrong, I can just sit there and say, oh, well, it must have changed, or, oh, I had my source was wrong, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't matter. And I can tell you in all honesty that there are people who were long trusted mainstream media people in this city who used to make stuff up. Okay? Used to absolutely just make stuff up for their own agenda. And
Which sport, Anthony?
In hockey. I'm talking about hockey. Okay. And I'm talking about, if you want, there are writers who used to make stuff up completely. It used to drive me insane. Okay? It used to drive me insane.
Do they still?
No. Well, do they? I don't know if they still do. The person the one person specifically that I'm talking about is no longer on the beat in town.
Ooh.
And not because this isn't the reason that they're not on the beat in town, but the reason that they're not on the beat in town is because of other reasons that we've been talking about on Crossing Broad for the last couple of weeks, and that is changes that took place over at Comcast. Okay. But it absolutely used to happen.
I'm just saying, I was talking to Claude Giroux.
Yeah,
and Claude.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I literally used to sit there and watch it happen. I used to watch it happen because my seat was right next to his, and I would sit there and be like, "What the hell is he? What is he doing? He's not getting any. Where is this information coming from?" And it was always off. It was.
So what's the genesis of this one individual of the or former individual of the Flyers media scrum? Like, what's the genesis of making up a story?
So let me just put it out there. I mean, it's Tim Panaccio that I'm talking about, right? I don't want to sit here and hide it, okay? And I don't want to sit here. I also don't want to.
He used to be called what, the insider, right? He was the Flyers insider. He was
right.
He was the hockey equivalent of what Jim Salisbury was for the Phillies.
Right. Now, I also don't want to sit here and and say that Tim always made stuff up, because Tim didn't always make stuff up. Tim and I, back when I first started the beat, had a great relationship. We traveled. We used to, plan our travel stuff kind of together, and say, okay, what flight are you going to be on? This way we can go, and hey, who's going to rent the car this time? We were trying to save the company's money. At least I was, anyway. I was working for a suburban newspaper and traveling. Tim had the Inquirer budget, which was 10 times what I had. But we would do things like that. Oh, you're renting a car? Okay, then I won't rent a car, or something along those. But we always used to plan that stuff around. And Tim at one time was a really good reporter. He was a bulldog, and he pissed people off, and that's why Bob Clark called him an asshole on television, if you recall, back in the Lindros era. It actually happened on live TV, and it's because Tim was really good at his job. And Tim was even good at his job when he was getting older. He was there, but Tim started to feel the pressure, okay? And he started to feel the pressure from other outlets that started to be as good as his coverage. And I think that's what the genesis was for him to try and stay one up. The other thing is that Tim's great source was Peter Luco. And Peter Luco, when he was president of the team, really gave a lot of good stories out. And he would tell you, and it was legit. I mean, he was as good a source as you can have. And he was Tim's guy. And then Luco started to become other people's guys as well. So Tim didn't have the exclusive stuff all the time from Luco. And I think that kind of bothered him, because now he didn't have, he couldn't trust one person in the organization to kind of tell him everything. So now Tim was never good with player relationships. A couple guys, but for the most part, they all kind of thought he was, they all kind of thought that he was different, that he was, weird and odd. And so he didn't have the player relationships that some of the other beat writers had. And so I think it got to that point where Tim didn't have any other alternative but to try and create a narrative on his own. And it didn't happen all the time, but it did happen. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that it happened. And so this kind of thing it started from there, okay? And then it developed even more. As people had more access, they didn't use the access to develop those relationships that you need to develop as a reporter, but rather use the access as a cover. And the access then becomes, oh, but I'm down there. I've talked to people, but who are you? I don't see you talking to. I'm there every game too. And I'm a very observant person, and I see guys who go off and talk to players by themselves, and that's great. And I'm not trying to intervene on what their conversation is. I just know that's a reporter who's working hard to develop a relationship. And I'll give a guy, one of the beat guys, credit on this. I'll say Dave Isaac from the Courier in Jersey. He is constantly off talking to different guys privately, and that's because Dave is developing those has developed over the years he's covered the team, has developed those relationships. So if you see a report from Dave Isaac that something's coming, it's probably plugged in, it's probably clued in. Someone has probably told him, and he's not making it up. Okay, so I look at that and I say, okay, well that's the way it should be. But then you have guys, and this is, again, we're crossing sports here, but then you have guys like Joe Giglio, who have zero contacts with the team that he's talking about, right? Or the organization or the people involved in a trade, and he's out there saying, "Oh, well, I have a source who's saying this." Well, now you're just crossing your fingers.
Let me stop you for a second, because I think that there's a distinct difference between somebody like Joe Giglio and then somebody who uses their outlet and the name of their publisher or whatever. In the case of Panaccio, you said he used to work for, was it Daily News and the Inquirer?
Well, he worked for the Inquirer. He didn't work for the.
Okay, so for the Inquirer,
and they were just so you know, and I'll let you finish in a second. The Inquirer and the Daily News, even though they are the same company now, they were owned by the same company, were always fierce rivals.
Yeah.
Just so you know. But anyway, go ahead, continue.
So, okay. So he used to work for the Inquirer. That was when he was at his best. And then he ended up at CSN Philly where he did nothing of note. So I think when you're a casual fan, so at least from my perspective, I think the reason that this gets under your skin so much is because you've been on the side of things where you're expected to be a respectable member of the media and somebody who's only going to put out stuff that's true or is directly sourced from the team, right? And that's your job. Now, for me, as a casual fan, like I think there's a difference in what kind of things we're looking for, or at least from my vantage point of I take things with a grain of salt. Now, I think that somebody in the case of Pinocchio who might have used the Inquirer or even CSN Philly when it was still that, I don't think he worked for NBC Sports Philly. I think it was just when it was still CSN. It doesn't matter.
Right.
When you're using one of those outlets as, you know, your instant credibility, and then CSN Philly gives you the Flyers insider tag and you're making things up, that to me is actually a more egregious error or a more egregious abuse of power, position, or whatever than what Giglio did.
You're 100%. You're 100% right. You're 100% right.
So from my perspective, I look at it and I say, okay, I know that Joe Giglio is a reporter, or not a reporter. He is a guy who writes for NJ.com the same way I think that like I occasionally write for Crossing Broad about like basketball. And I know that if I see him say something, I'm not really taking it that seriously. I would actually argue in this entire thing that I think a big part of why things blew up, and I think where some of your ire maybe should be going, is more towards WIP. Because I think if a guy comes on and one of the radio hosts, so let's say that it's the Fanatic, let's say that like Jason Martinez said, Jason Martinez is a little bit more plugged in on the Flyer side, I would guess. Let's say Harry Mays on the midday show says that he knows somebody who knows someone who works for the Knicks, and it's come out that from the Knicks organization that they're looking to trade Kristaps Porzingis, and the Sixers have already had exploratory talks. Well, then that would be something that I would take with a grain of salt, because I'd say, well, I like Harry Mays, like he's a good personality on the radio, but even if he says that a deal is close to being done, I don't know if, like, I certainly wouldn't take that as gospel, and I don't really know if the station would run with it as gospel. So I think there's a lot of this that falls on WIP, because if one of your hosts comes out with something and says, hey, I know somebody who said that this thing is done, then it's like, okay, well, you could decide to run with that, or that can just be a passing conversation. And what WIP kind of blew it up to be was this thing is done, and like you said, somebody else built their entire show around it. It was on the Marks and Reese Twitter feed, and you know, it seems like a lot of people, and it was just on the WIP side. This wasn't something I don't think that was discussed on the Fanatic side, because why would you cite a host from another station? The thing that to me I think was disingenuous in what Giglio said, or the thing that I think kind of takes it into a slightly different territory, is when you're saying that the latter part of it, where he says that the source said that McPhail is a magician. That to me says that the source that you're talking to, or the source that you are, roundabout citing, also knows what the deal is, and knows what the package that the Orioles in that case would be getting back. So, like, if I decided to go on Crossing Broad, or on Crossing Broadcast, and I said, hey, I know an industry insider who said that the Flyers are close to trading for Erik Karlsson, and they said that Hextall drove a hard bargain, but ultimately it's going to be something that we're going to be able to stomach. That would imply that I would know what the package was, or that my industry source knew what Hextall was offering in this deal, right? And the sentiments that were coming out of Ottawa. And I think that part is what kind of takes it into a more egregious error on his part, because it implies that not only is there somebody he's been talking to, but that person happens to know what the entire trade is. And that's where you go from being just like a sports radio guy who's throwing stuff against the wall to see if it sticks, and you're kind of passing it off as if you're a more legitimate insider. And I think that's where he made a mistake, and I think WIP made the biggest mistake in continuing to promote it as though it had come from, Ken Rosenthal, or even locally. Like Jim Salisbury sometimes breaks this stuff. Like, there's certainly a difference, or there should have been a difference articulated by the radio station, that Giglio is a guy who claims to have talked to somebody. He's not an actual insider. He's not in the locker room. Yada yada yada.
Yeah, okay. I could see what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you on the WIP thing. I really don't. I think that you're right that they made it made it fester, and very often this is what happens. You get a little germination of a potential story, and then it gets blown up by whoever, whether it's social media or whether it's a radio station or TV station or a website with a clickbait headline, as NJ.com is usually good for. And lo and behold, that's where Joe Giglio comes from. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that, and this is where I'm going to disagree with you, Russ. As members of the media, and we all are, okay, in a lot of ways, and this includes you and me, okay, because we write for an entity that has access to cover professional sports teams, okay. So even though in your instance, for example, you are not one of the beat guys, right? You are not one of you, but you do write for a website that does have coverage of professional teams. Therefore, you need to, and everyone at Crossing Broad needs to hold themselves to the standard that if there is going to be something that you learn, something that you glean, some inside information that you have, that it is reported and reported responsibly and accurately, okay? You cannot just throw something to the wall and hope it sticks, okay? Because then what you are doing is not only are you making a bad name for yourself if you're wrong, but you're making a bad name for the website, for Crossing Broad. So you wouldn't do that. So when Giglio does this, he's not only putting himself at under the spotlight of the Twitter, the Twitter world, where they're going to tell him how much of an idiot he is, but he's also putting the credibility of NJ.com, and because he also wrote it for NJ.com. Oh, lo and behold, that story has been since updated. Okay, not there anymore because that's how they operate, and put WIP credibility at risk by reporting it the way he did. And that's where the problem lies. However, the argument that you're making, there are people who say, well, that's okay today. And I tell you that 10 years ago, that would not be okay. And it doesn't make me old. It doesn't make me, get off my lawn. 10 years ago, the public was not okay with false reports. It was not okay. Now, there's a sentimentality that's out there. It's like, oh, well, it just got it wrong. No big deal. No big whoop. You can't have that, because ultimately that's what leads to people making stuff up. That's why we are where we are societally with everything. Now we're on a hockey podcast talking about this, but like I said, there are things in the real world that are outside the entertainment of sports that are happening that are being abused by people because they can just make stuff up, and we're just kind of okay with it anymore. When did that happen? When did that transition as a society? When did we become a people who were like, oh, it doesn't matter?
I think honestly, I think it was the advent of the 24/7 news cycle, and I think social media.
Right, because what makes it okay, Russ? What makes it okay?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think you're more upset about it because it's the life that you live, and it's the job that you've done, and it's got to be frustrating to work in that industry and have that be a livelihood, and know that the stuff that you're doing is honest and forthright, and then see somebody throw something out there and not have to face, necessarily the negative ramifications of it being either made up or it not coming to light. See, like my thing was when I saw the Giglio tweet, I thought, well, I really hope people come back and call him out on this, because otherwise, because of the way that WIP had promoted it, I'm like, well, that would be a pretty egregious error on their part, and on the fans' part, to just kind of let this one slide. I mean, if Jim Salisbury had reported that the thing was done and McPhail was a genius, and it didn't happen, I think he'd be crucified publicly for having a bad source, or for, I think people would call him out on the carpet of like, why did things change so much? And I think that there would have been a bigger firestorm around him, because he is the Phillies insider for NBCSN Philadelphia. And I think in Giglio's case, like, I think it was a stupid thing to put out there, but I think part of the problem is because his station gave it so much more credibility than it probably deserved. So I don't know, but like I think a fan, if you're looking for a reason to get excited about a trade rumor or about a free agent signing, you're going to glom onto whatever you can. I mean, think about the amount of times, and maybe you don't see it as much, but like there are certainly times where people go and they'll try to connect, a few digital breadcrumbs and think that because of the way that, a guy goes on and likes somebody's Instagram post, well, that means he's obviously going to that team. Or Eric Carlson went and commented on a JVR photo and said, let's do this. Well, it's like, well, let's do what? And who is we, right? And people are trying to put those things together and turn it into, well, that means Eric Carlson's going to get traded to the Flyers. None of that is real, by the way. That's just a hypothetical. But I think if you're a fan and you're looking for some kind of hope to glom onto, it doesn't matter where the source comes from. And I don't think anybody, or I don't think a lot of the general Philadelphia fan base is going to sit down and look at a sports radio host's credentials. They're going to say, well, to some extent, this guy has a job doing whatever it is that he does, and I'm going to give it some kind of credibility. So I guess that kind of comes back around to your idea that because he has an outlet like he does, he needs to be more careful and a little bit more honest. But I think a fan who is a little bit more informed is going to, kind of hold back a second and say, wait a second, this guy's he's a sports radio host. I think that there is a certain hierarchy in reporting that, an intelligent fan is going to look at and say, this needs to be taken with a massive grain of salt.
And I'm going to stop you right there. You're right. The more knowledgeable sports fan will get it. But I'm going to argue and tell you right now that the more knowledgeable sports fan is the minority when it comes to sports fans.
Well, and I would think that probably also pertains to the people who are listening 24/7 to sports talk radio. Yeah, right? Mean, like if I can't listen to it anymore because it's nonsense, stupid points like when the Kawhi Leonard trade was going to go down with Toronto. I mean, we're going into sports that are not hockey, but like when that stuff was going down, people were like, well, why don't the Sixers just like trade Ben Simmons? Like that makes sense. Why don't they just trade Jared Bayless and Robert Covington and like 6 first-round picks? It's like, well, because if you understood how the cap worked or if you understood how trade value worked, you'd know that's a stupid premise and it's also not permissible through the CBA. So no, like that's dumb. And so and that's the people who actually have the courage or the stupidity to actually call up and put those dumb ideas out there. Well, so no, I think you're right. Like I think the intelligent sports fan is a minority. Luckily, through Crossing Broad, I think, commenters aside, or most of the commenters aside, I think a lot of people who read the site are actually intelligent people who are looking for nuanced opinions. And I think the people who read your stuff or who read Kevin's stuff know that you guys are credentialed and you're plugged into the team. And so the stuff that you're putting out there is legitimate and credible. And I would even say Bob not being a beat reporter per se, or like being down in the locker room, I think Bob does a very good job of writing up the Phillies stuff in a way that is both honest and credible.
Yeah, no, he does, and that's why I like our site. I like the people at our site because I think that you're getting that honesty, and we deal with rumor and stuff. Sure, we do, but we're not sitting there saying, oh, I got a source who said blah, 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 unless we actually have one. Like, unless there's a real one there, then we can put it out. And then I'm going to put it in one of my stories, or then Kevin's going to put it in one of his stories. But we're not just sitting there making stuff up or going off of a report of another reporter who's a friend who doesn't really report this stuff for their media outlet, but they feel like they're a little bit plugged in. That's the kind of issues that I have. And if a majority of the fans are getting their information from, and be honest, I mean, let's figure where are the majority of fans in Philadelphia getting their information from these days? What do you think it is? Where do you think?
Well, I would think Twitter's a lot of it.
Okay, all right. So Twitter's one for sure. But I will tell you, and this is based off of statistical data that I have from my other job, that 88% of news today in general, is done through Facebook.
Wow.
Okay, 88% of news is disseminated through Facebook. And so like anything. So again, it's just snippets. Nobody's really taking time anymore, and it's sad for me as a writer, but nobody's really taking time anymore to read stories. Nobody's taking time anymore to really get to the crux of it. A small percentage of people are. I mean, there are people that are still out there who want to read long form writing, who want to dive into a deeply dive into a story and say, all right, let's break it down and let's look at it real. But for the most part, people just want, as quick as they can. Oh, yeah, so and so said that this is what's going to happen. Oh, and then it does, right? And that's what they want. So if that's the primary place and that's the primary way that you're getting your news today, then the people that are doing that, the people who are putting that news up, have to be all that much more responsible than they are. And the fact that they aren't, and then people say, well, it's okay. That makes for, so I'm saying this is the snowball effect, and this is why we have what we have. Anyway,
it makes the people who do their job honestly and with integrity, and who do it for a living, it makes their job that much harder. So again, that's why I understand why you're so much more worked up about this than I think the casual fan would be.
You're right,
but I think it's okay. I think you should be upset. Right? I think anybody who works in any kind of profession, I think if you are honest and are working to, do a good job at whatever it is, and then somebody else comes in and does a half-assed job of, something similar and gets all the praise or is, not held accountable when they do something that's not in accordance with your company's policy or whatever, then yeah, you're going to be upset about it. So
I want to share. This is, and I'm not going to say who it was with, but I had a conversation this past week with a very popular reporter in this town who has covered multiple sports, but very popular, well-known name, and I'll tell you who it is off air. Actually, I'll text it to you, who it is, okay? But we had a conversation, and he said...
Oh, he? Okay.
Yeah, it's a he. He said... when did it become? I'm reading it because we had a Twitter DM conversation. When did it become acceptable in this town to be an absolute pom-pom waving homer? There are guys who have major jobs on the radio and they use "we" on every team in this town. Maybe I'm an old man journalist frustrated by the current state of the business, but my goodness, this is ridiculous. So I mean that's another thing, and to be honest, this guy is not much old. I don't even know how old he is, but he's my generation. Okay, so he might be a couple years.
We're narrowing it down.
He might be a couple years older than me. Might be a couple years younger than me. So you're
glad that you and Tim Panaccio are back to the speaking terms. That's great.
By the way, that reminds me. I got to tell you the Donald Brashear story.
We got to get this. We got to get this going quick because my family's at least stirring with the two little ones. I don't know if your family's starting to stir or not.
No, my daughter woke up and she already came over to me and she was like tapping me on the shoulder. It already happened. So.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so it's not just me. I even have somebody who works at WIP who I was talking to about this texting me who called it amateur hour over there. Okay, so there are people who actually work for that company who are working in that building who think it's ridiculous. So I mean, I'm not alone. I'm not this lone voice crying in the wilderness, and I'm not saying it just because I'm upset in the state of journalism where it's gotten to. Although I am.
Here I have a real hockey version of this. You ready for it?
Go ahead.
So I'm on NBCSN Philly's website, right?
Yeah.
And the headline is Nolan Patrick selected as #1 breakout player for 2018-19 by NHL Network.
Uh-huh.
So okay, I'm thinking, all right, NHL Network's behind this. Somebody wrote this thing up. It's got to be like a large panel, or maybe it's a poll done within the network. I'm thinking it has to be a pretty big sample size, right? No, it's one guy. NHL Network analyst Mike Johnson, who played 12 years in the league, selected Nolan Patrick as his #1 breakout player.
Yeah,
it's one guy.
Yeah,
I mean that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate clickbait, right? Like, yeah. It's right on the front of NBC Sports Philly's website, and like that, I don't get it. Like it's there, and the way that it certainly looks is that there was a large informed contingent of people who did this. Oh, and here's the other thing: young flyer named NHL Network's #1 breakout player for 2018-19. That was the trending topic headline, and then you click on it, and then you get into it. And it's one guy from NHL Network who picked him, and so like that's misleading, and that to me is also awful because NBC Sports Philadelphia, and we've been talking a lot about this between Crossing Broadcast and on the site and everything, but the way that they're kind of going about doing some of the stuff that they're doing, that to me is reason to kind of stay away from their page for a little bit. At least on my perspective, I'm like, this looked like it was supposed to be something that was a whole lot more legitimate than what it actually was. You could have just as easily said reporter or analyst, Nolan
Right.
Patrick #1, but instead you made it look like it was this much more legitimate thing. Whatever. Tell me about Donald Brashear
Okay, so
before we head out.
this is a great story, right?
Donald
So
Brashear and Easter, right? Wasn't that
yes,
the...
exactly. Very good. Good memory, Russ.
Thank you.
So we are up in New Jersey. This was in I want to say 06. I think it was 06. We're up in New Jersey on Easter Sunday, which was a miserable drive. Okay, to have to drive up to the old Brendan Byrne Arena for a hockey game on an Easter Sunday afternoon, and Flyers playing the Devils, and actually, it might have even been the year before. It might have been 04 season. Now that I think about it. Well, Robert Ashe was still the goalie, and the Flyers were getting beat, and Ashe was having a terrible game, and so he gets yanked. Right, Hitchcock's the coach, and he gets yanked. And as Ashe is skating off the ice, back in these days, the press area at the Brendan Byrne Arena was the best ever. You actually sat literally right behind the bench. It was so good. You were, and it wasn't just the media. Like I used to sit next to Bob Clark. I mean, my seat was right next to Clarkie, and you sat literally right behind the bench, so you could see everything and hear everything. It was great.
That's awesome.
No stadium is like that anymore. It was the only one that was like that at the time. So Ashe, as he's skating off, it looked like at the time that he was screaming at Hitch because he was mad that he was getting pulled, and because he skated by the bench and you could see him yelling, and Hitch was trying to say something back, and so we're thinking he's yelling at Hitch. So we go into the locker room after the game, and right before we go to the locker room, as we're leaving, Ed Moran was the beat writer for the Philadelphia Daily News at the time. Panache was at the Inquirer. I was for Delco. Wayne Fish for Bucks County, and Chuck Gormley for the Courier Post in New Jersey. We were the guys that were up there. And Ed Moran wanted to go have Easter dinner with his family. So he says to me and a couple of the other guys, he says, "Hey, listen, guys, I'm going to bail out early." He's like, "I've already written my story. If anybody says anything that's inflammatory, just let me know." And whatever. It's just okay, fine. So Ed leaves. And we all kind of just were like, yeah, okay, Ed, no problem. So Ed leaves. So the rest of us go in the locker room. And we talk to Ashe. And Ashe insists that he wasn't yelling at Hitchcock. He says it wasn't Hitch. It was somebody else. And we're like, well, who else could it have been, right? Looked like he was yelling at Hitchcock. So Hitch, being the greatest coach source in the history of hockey, after he does his thing, after he does his availability, we all turn off our recorders. He goes, if you want to talk to the guy that this is really about, go find Brashear. so we're like, okay, now we got to go find Brashear.
Oh, she was fired up out there.
So that was great Hitch, right? That's what he used to do all the time. So now we're looking for Brashear. Nobody can find him, right? And then finally we talk to Zach, the PR guy. He's like, oh, he must have already gone to the bus. So we're like, oh, well, we missed this. We'll catch up on this. It's Easter. We'll catch up on this at practice tomorrow. So we start to head back, and everybody's going back. And Wayne Fish stops me and Panache, and he says, "Let's go to the bus." We're like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, let's go to the bus." So the three of us, Chuck has already gone back to the media room, but the three of us walk over to where the bus is, and we
Pack mentality. Good. Yeah.
We pull Brashear off the bus to talk to Brashear. And
I'm sure you grabbed Brashear and pulled him off.
Well, no, what I mean by pull him off is like we said to the guy.
I'm just trying to imagine.
Wasn't physically pulling him off.
Three hockey reporters go onto a bus. Hey, Donnie on here.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. Hey, Donnie, come here, or we're gonna rip you off the bus. Eh?
So Brash was great with us. Like, he was really good with the media. And so he, we asked for him to come off. He comes off, and you could tell, like, he's still ready to. So apparently he said something to Ash about how terrible he was, and Ash said something back to him, and they were like jawing at each other. And, Brash had some great quotes, and, was talking about Ash needs to play better, but we all need to play better. It's getting towards the end of the season, blah, blah, blah. I mean, really good. I mean, it was some great brash stuff, and he was really kind of like leadership stuff about the team needs to be better going into the playoffs. So we got these great quotes. I'm like, okay, great. So we're all heading back. We go back to the media room, and Panache makes a declarative statement to the entire room. He doesn't just say it to me and Wayne as we're walking back. He says it to the entire room. We are not to share this with Moran. Right? We're not, because at this point I had already given it to Chuck, who wasn't with us. I said, hey, you might want this because I know you were interested. So I had already given him the quotes, and Panache announces we are not giving it to Moran.
Oh, right? How nice.
So, because Moran's not there. Because I guess Panache shared it with somebody from New York and whatever. But like, it was kind of like, hey, if you guys want this, you can have it. But we're not sharing it, Moran, because he didn't stick around. This was Panache's announcement. So Moran starts calling all the different writers. He's calling me. He's calling Wayne. He's calling Chuck. He's calling Panache. And nobody's talking to him. So finally, I answered the phone, and he says to me, he's like, Anthony, did I miss anything? And I was like, yeah, Ed, you did. And Panache is sitting right there, like he's staring daggers at me. And he's like, well, what did I miss? I said, I can't tell you. I can't tell you because we made an agreement that he's like, what kind of agreement did you make, Anthony? Anthony, what kind of agreement? And he's got a real thick Boston accent. And I'm like, I said, if I were you, I would check in. All I can say is, if I were you, I would try and contact PR and see if you can get some information that way. And so now Ed's like freaking out, right? Whatever. So I hang up the phone. We write our stories. We drive home. The next day, the Flyers were heading. I forget where we were heading, but I think we're literally going back up to New York for a game against the Rangers, because I remember being on the road again when Moran calls me, and he says, and this is the exact conversation he has with me. He says, Anthony, I first want to tell you I'm really disappointed in you, Anthony. I'm really disappointed in you. I thought you were my friend. I said, Ed, I said, I had to. I said, we all made an agreement. He's like, but I'm going to let it slide, Anthony, because you've always been good to me. This is Moran, right, saying this. And so I'm like, okay, yeah. He's like, because I know from somebody else that Panache is behind this. It's all Panaccio. Well, let me tell you something, Anthony. He's dead to me. He's dead to me. That guy, and he's F-bombing him the entire time. Like I would sound like a total sailor if I was saying it exactly what he said. But he said he's dead to me, and he's like flipping out about Panaccio. The entire playoffs, the Daily News and the Inquirer, you would have thought it was a constant back and forth of one-upsmanship. Who can beat the other side? And they hated each other. They didn't talk to each other for the entire playoffs, and even into the summer during the draft and free agency. They didn't speak one word to each other, and it was a constant battle between them, all because of this thing. I swear to you, this is classic hockey. This is classic hocky. September rolls around, they shake hands and they're friends again.
Aw, how sweet! What a happy ending.
It was good, but like I remember walking into the first practice at training camp thinking to myself, is Moran and Panache still going to be going at it? And they're like, I show up and they're all buddy. I'm like, what's going on? What happened? When did this take place? And like, oh yeah, we just let it, put it behind us. Everything's okay. I'm like, holy hell, this lasted for like 6 months and now all of a sudden it's fine.
That's insane.
So, anyway, Brashear gave us some great quotes, and then it ended up leading to a war between the Inquirer and the Daily News, because Moran got in a lot of trouble from his editor. Like, why didn't you stick around? Why does everybody else have this and you don't have it? Like, I mean, there was some real stuff going on at the Daily News with that, and Moran got kind of in trouble for it, and so he just took it out on Panache, and it was, I mean, literally, you could read the stories and you could tell that it was a direct shot at the Inquirer, and the Inquirer would respond with a direct shot at the Daily News. And we're sitting there like, as the suburban guys, like, these are owned by the same company and they're like killing each other. Like, this is great stuff. What are you kidding me?
Well, that's great. That's pretty awesome. Well done.
So there you go. There's my Donald Brashear Easter story.
So before we leave, because I think it's very important that we get to this, let's play a game of Name That Flyer.
Oh, I love Name That Flyer.
Dun, 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 dun. The last one set up the Brashear story, so here we go. Are you ready?
Yeah.
This former Flyer played 2 seasons in the Orange and Black. In his best season for the Flyers, he played in 79 games, scoring 24 points, including 1 game-winning goal, 1 shorthanded goal, 1 play goal, and 1 even strength goal. He was a defenseman who finished 17th in the Norris Trophy voting. Name that Flyer. He was a defenseman, obviously. Yes.
You're going to give me a time period? I mean, guys, there's been so many guys.
The early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
Early to mid 2000s. Played 2 seasons with the Flyers.
Oh, man. And 2 seasons, and he had 1 really good year?
1 really good year, and then his final year was cut short, and that was the last season he played in the NHL. I can give you the name of somebody else, I believe, who signed the same year.
I'll give a guess. I'm going to give a guess first before you do that.
Okay.
Eric Weinrich?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
A guy who signed the exact same season, it was the same offseason, was Darian Hatcher.
Darian Hatcher.
It was another defenseman who was signed alongside Darian Hatcher.
Okay. So
this was the 05, I think it was the 05 season.
The same season I was just talking about, right? I mean, that 05-06 would be, who else was on that team? Let me think back in my head. The defensemen they had that year were, they had Yoni picking in.
You're going to kick yourself.
They had Kim Janssen was still on that team, but he was here longer than 2 years.
Come on, Mr.
Hatcher.
There's a hint in Mr. Perhaps the initials of the player.
In Mr. M-I?
No, just M-R. M-R.
Oh, Mr. is an M-R. Oh, okay. All right. M-R. Mike Rathje.
There you go. Bingo, bango, bongo. That is now our second edition of Name That Flyer.
Yeah, I don't have a great follow-up story on Mike Rathje.
If you've been following from your couch or wherever you're listening to the podcast, if you've now gotten Donald Brashear and Mike Rathje in back-to-back editions of this fun game, make sure to reach out to us on Twitter at JoyOnBroad and at AntSanPhilly and let us know. You won't win a prize, but you'll win the enjoyment of knowing that you beat Anthony SanFilippo in Flyers trivia, which is exciting, but also kind of disappointing because Anthony, I mean, I feel like as a guy with journalistic credibility, you should know these things, and you should report these things through the right. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm a little disappointed in myself. I mean, but I got to be honest with you, Russ. Usually, when you do trivia questions, there's usually something a little bit more to it
Don't blame the
2 seasons, 79 points, and was 17th. In the voting for 17th.
That was big news for the Flyers back then. Okay, that's really big stuff. That's great stuff. I love the fact, by the way, as my kids come flying down the stairs, I love the fact that as we were getting ready to record, we said, we'll probably do a half-hour show, and here we are, and it's been almost an hour. So I think it's probably about as good a time as any to wrap. So why
don't you tell everybody about the other shows on the Crossing Broad Podcasting Network?
Well, there's crossing broadcasts every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sort of, with me and Kyle Scott.
Sort of.
This week is going to be a little bit weird because I'll be out of town, so I don't actually know what the schedule is going to look like this week. Crossed Up, a Phillies podcast with Anthony and Bob Wankel. That is on Tuesday mornings. It is available for you on your morning commute. Of course, Snow the Goalie, where hopefully we'll be wrangling somebody in for the next episode. I don't know if that'll be Thursday or if we'll be a little bit delayed in that, but that's okay. It'll be worth the wait. And we've got Crossing Broad FC, which is on the weekend. Phil is, I believe, back in town, so we'll be doing the long-awaited recap of the World Cup final, but we'll actually start to turn the page to the club seasons. And the International Champions Cup is coming around, so
I can't wait for this.
Some games locally. Don't be a jerk. And It's Always Soccer in Philadelphia, which recorded, I believe, episode number 52 this past weekend with Kevin Kincaid and Dave Zeitlin. So make sure you go check that out if you're a fan of the game with the ball on grass that people kick and aren't allowed to touch inside the box with their hands. So that's unless you're the goalie. Speaking of goalies, this has been Snow the Goalie, part of the Crossing Broad Podcast Network. Don't forget, if you're interested in advertising on Snow the Goalie or any of the shows on the Crossing Broad Podcast Network, please reach out to, I guess, me, at Joy on Broad, or to Kyle at Crossing Broad. I believe his email is crossingbroad@gmail.com, I think, or Kyle at crossingbroad.com. Either works. Until the next time we record, I'm Russ at Joy on Broad. That's Anthony at AntSanPhilly. Thanks for listening.